The availability of fine instrumentalists has always been an inspiration to composers. When Paul Tabuteau, the famous French flutist, first organized the first permanent woodwind group in Paris about 1872, it breathed new life into the entire woodwind world. Many composers then wrote specifically for this group. Among these composers thus inspired was Charles Lefevre, a professor at the Paris Conservatory and the man who wrote this music that we play today. I like to think of the founder of this chamber music group, Paul Tabuteau, as my great-grandfather, musically speaking, that is. The reason is that George Barrère, the bearded French flutist who was brought to this country by Walter Damrosch to play in the New York Symphony, had been a student of Tabetau's at the Paris Conservatory. And one of Barrère's first students at the Institute of Musical Art in New York was our own famous American flutist, William Kincaid. And I am fortunate to be one of Mr. Kincaid's students and also his colleague in the Philadelphia Orchestra.
Bob, since we're discussing our musical ancestors, I feel very proud that I'm a direct descendant from that very same group, as a matter of fact. Rose, the very famous French clarinetist of the day, played with the group. And my teacher, Daniel Bonnard, came to this country, rather before he came to this country, he studied at the Paris Conservatoire with a student of Rose. And when he came to this country in the early 1900s, he brought with him that magnificent French school of clarinet playing. And it so happens that my father studied with him years ago, and I studied with him. Consequently, you see, we have two members in the family who are descendants from Rose. The next movement of this Lefevre Quintet is a very charming allegretto scherzando.
Although many great French bassoonists, such as Maynard, Allard, Letellier, came to the United States, practically all the bassoonists in the United States favor the German or Heckel system of bassoon. Originally, all bassoons sounded the same, but about 100 years ago, the Germans decided to improve the instrument to keep pace with other wind instruments. The French decided to preserve the characteristic sound of the instrument. And the Americans, for many reasons, prefer the more open and round sound of the German system bassoon. However, French bassoonists added a great deal to the art of bassoon playing, and their contribution is immense. And they were also part of the wonderful art life that took place in Paris in the second half of the 19th century. This wonderful lithograph of Lautrec, which I happen to have in my modest art collection, shows this relationship to some extent. It is actually the cousin of Toulouse-Lautrec, who was the first bassoon player of the opera and who also was painted by such great painter as Degas.
So we Americans always have appreciated greatly the artistry of the French Impressionists and these woodwind players that we were talking about, and their work has been increasingly important in our lives. Now, the French have also established a school of horn playing, a little on the sweet side perhaps, and the Germans have a mellow style of playing, and we American horn players have tried to take the best from each. Have you ever listened to a new recording of a familiar classical composition and heard it sound like a saxophone and wondered, well, what's that doing in there? Well, it could be that it would be a French recording, and that strange instrument would be a horn played by a French performer. Now, those French performers love to use the vibrato, or the undulating tone, and that gives their quality a saxophone-like timbre. My son just got back from Europe, and he reports that even the hunting horn players at Versailles use vibrato. Now, whether you like that or not, it's just a matter of personal taste. Now, the last movement in the Lefevre suite is a fine allegro that has a nice little fugue and a whirlwind of a finish. As exciting as this music is, it is sort of anticlimax, though, since Stravinsky, 15 years later, rocked Paris with his Rite of Spring. But now the finale of the Lefebvre suite.
throughout the development of woodwind instruments, we see that each period is dominated by a single city or country that seem to furnish the finest players. The devotion of these players to teaching and the passing on of the high standards that they themselves have created sort of makes them the unsung heroes of the evolution of music. The one city that dominated the musical scene at the end of the 19th century was Paris, where woodwind playing flourished. And from Paris, there was a great migration to America of these fine players. In this migration, 55 years ago, a young French oboe player appeared on the scene who was to crystallize the best of the styles existing at that time into a school which became later his own, or even more intimately identified now as the American School of Woodwind Playing. This man was Marcel Tabuteau. His teachings at the Curtis Institute in Music in Philadelphia have undoubtedly been the strongest single influence in instrumental playing in America over the past 40 years. Since Mr. Tabuteau's retirement in 1953, he has been visiting his native France, and his recent return to America happily coincided with our preparation of this series. He readily consented to film a short talk with us, and you will now see and hear a great musician, a great teacher, and an unforgettable personality, Marcel Tabuteau.
Oh, well, if I don't count the years I studied in Paris, you know, I have been first oboist in the harmony, in the little band at Compiègne.
My goodness.
And by the way, the band master was a nephew of Massenet.
Massenet.
Massenet. His name was Cavalier Massenet.
Is that so?
So, and Massenet, when I had the opportunity to meet him, advised his nephew to send me to the French Conservatoire.
Fine reference.
Yes. And I spent about 4 or 5 years there with Gillet, Taffanel, who was a teacher of the woodwind group and also of the orchestra class. And it was most interesting because Taffanel was a splendid musician and a great flutist.
Well, you know, it's really very fortunate for us that you should come back at this time, because in our preparation of this series, 200 years of woodwind music and players and the woodwind instruments and chamber music, we have gone through the development of wind players in Vienna and Mannheim, and we come to Paris, where it really reached great heights and what could be called the La Belle Époque, and that was certainly during the period when you were there as a student. And those men that you mentioned, Taffanel and Gillet, they must have been great artists in not only on their instruments, but as musicians, which is even more important.
Yes. You know, they had quite some organization of woodwind playing in Paris, and the most important one was what they called the Grand Vent. And the Grand Vent, the personnel of the Grand Vent was the teaching staff of the Paris Conservatoire. And if you're interested, I could tell you that Saint-Saëns was the pianist of the group, Taffanel was the flutist, Gillet the oboist, Rose, the famous clarinet player, Letellier the bassonist, and the horn player, I always forget his name.
Venable.
Exactly so. But how does it happen that you know all that?
Well, he's a student.
Oh, I see, yes. Well, congratulations to you.
Well, those must have been fabulous days in Paris. The virtuosity of these players,
Yes.
such a high excellence.
Exactly so it was. You know, there was a legend in those days that woodwind playing was a French specialty. In fact, people from all over the world thought you had to be born a Frenchman to be a good oboe player.
Well,
Yes.
Well, I'm sure that it came from a good source, because I know in reading about this woodwind group that you spoke of before, they traveled around Europe quite a bit playing, and I know they had tremendous success in other countries, Germany and Russia and
Yes.
places, and probably fine musicians heard them.
Exactly so. You know, for instance, when they played in Berlin, there was the famous Joachim, you know, the célèbre teacher.
Violinist.
Yes.
He was
With-
the man that Brahms wrote the violin concerto for Joachim.
Yes. And he was so much impressed with their playing that they were absolutely surprised because they never heard anything like it, you know. Because the schooling in those days in Germany, for instance, a man would not specialize in one instrument like we did in the French Conservatoire. You know, he would play the violin and the clarinet or the piano or the fagot. You see, when there was no specialization like here today, you know, when you have to devote all your life to become an oboe player. And you know it personally, don't you? With the rhythm making and this and all that, you know.
Full-time occupation.
Yes. So Joachim was very much impressed, especially from the oboe player, Gillet. And of course, I don't know if it is the truth, but I was told from many sources that Joachim, after graduation from some of his pupils, would advise them to spend a few weeks or to have a little talk about music with the oboe player of the group.
Is that so?
Yes.
And this was your teacher.
Yes, and I was very fortunate to have such a teacher.
Well, you certainly carried on in that great tradition when you came to this country and started your teaching of not only oboe players, but all of the wind instruments here in Philadelphia.
Yes, I must admit one thing. Of course, I had the possibility in me to enjoy teaching and make good pupils, but if I would not have been given the opportunity to do it, it would not have been done by me anyhow. So I was fortunate enough to be chosen to do this kind of teaching and to give the whole tradition that we received in Paris to the American boys. And I assure they have been doing very well, because now the conductors do not have to go to Europe to find their personnel. They have, you know, they have it right here.
Thanks to you.
Yeah, well, I
Great
don't
pleasure.
know, to me. You know, I did it probably because I found so much fun in it. You know,
But one of the remarkable things is that, as I recall our days with you at the Curtis, was that with all your fun, you made it into a system. It was a system which had fun to it. It wasn't just...
Yes. Well, I wanted to establish a little system which would be a recreation. You know, for instance, my philosophy in playing and teaching, I was very inclined to teach them how to think beautifully. Because if you think beautifully, you play beautiful.
Okay.
And I believe to play as you think more than to play as you feel. Because how about the day you are not feeling so well? Don't you agree with it?
There's no question about
Well,
that.
So we have much fun, you know, trying to establish a little system which would amuse everybody.
Well, I understand I wasn't a student of yours at the Curtis Institute, but I did associate with you for 17 years in the Philadelphia Orchestra. We had some rich experiences together, and you certainly influenced my musical thinking. But
Well,
I've heard stories from your students how in explaining your system, sometimes you broke off an armchair.
Well, it was great fun, I assure you. And I had the reward, and I still have the reward to see them everywhere and be happy with their profession, and they find plenty of joy in playing with a big organization when they are today.
Well, you've certainly managed to impart that to the hundreds of students who studied under your direction at the Curtis Institute. And I think that you best exemplify that person who made this bridge between the excellence in Paris and what has taken place here in the United States. Hasn't the United States in some way affected you in your concepts of playing?
Yes, you know, I came here as a French oboe player, and I left the tradition after my research. I found the blending of the German oboe playing style with the French would be to my own taste. And I think I have succeeded to a certain extent, to create almost a new sonority on the oboe.
There's no question about that. It's not only the fact that you created something new on the oboe, but the fact that your teaching was something that could be applied to any instrument, not only the oboe, but to all the instruments. And that is the thing which has been shown with such tremendous success as you look over the personnel of the orchestras throughout America, so many of the boys, like myself, that had the privilege of being with you as a student.
Well, I am really delighted, I must confess to you, that when a horn player thanked me for the little fun we had together, I am very proud of it.
Well, we want to thank you very much for this opportunity to speak to you and tell all of us about your concepts of woodwind playing, which we hope to carry on for many years with the Philadelphia Woodwind Quintet.
Well, my best wishes to all of you.
Thank you.
This is National Educational Television.